How many dead bodies have you seen and why? I've seen a few. I've seen deceased relatives at open casket funerals like others in this thread. The first dead people I saw was as a young man whilst driving immediately after a car crash. I didn't see the accident, but it was obvious that a car tried overtaking and hit a truck coming the other way. This would have been only a minute or two before I arrived. Truck driver was physically fine but was in shock, what ambulance advised, but there were 3 deceased in the car and 1 alive in the passenger seat. That guy passed whilst I was trying to assist. He was conscious but had severe bleeding from their legs, and I couldn't get through the door/window to apply a tourniquet in time. The worst I've seen was a bomb tech in Afghanistan get called in to defuse a roadside improvised explosive device. It happened in an instant. The term I use is pink mist. It sounds horrible, but it happened so quick. I didn't know the guy, but I break down in one way or another on the anniversary every year. It's not some random brotherhood crap, but it hurt like a mother trucker. We had an EOD tech step on a pressure plate, but it smoked instead of exploded. Something was wrong with the explosive mixture, and the tech needed a few days off to recover from what was supposed to be the end of his life. Just the one, a total random encounter too. I normally drive to work, but on this particular day I decided to use my push bike. On my route to work I seen in the distance an elderly woman on the phone looking panicked. As I was approaching her, she waved me down to stop and had asked if I could help her. She said her husband had fallen on his front and she couldn't pick him up because he was much larger than her. Of course I said I would help, and she lead me the way to her house. She was on the phone to the ambulance who had asked her to find someone who was able to help move her husband. As we walked through her garden she told me to just leave my bike near the shed and follow her into her house. As I walked into the house she pointed up the stairs and said, "He's just in the landing." I walked up the stairs and there he was, just laying there. Motionless. I turned him over onto his back and still nothing. I hovered my head above his face and listened for signs of breath. Nothing. I checked for a pulse. Again nothing. I began to give him CPR, all whilst his wife was downstairs clueless. After literally about 20 seconds into CPR I heard the ambulance crew come in through the front door and up the stairs. I told them what I knew and they took over from there. On my way out the old lady said thank you so much, and she would wait on the front of her house in the morning and wait till I had biked past again and tell me that everything was okay. I still haven't seen her almost 1 year on. ER nurse, the answer is about the same. Now the ones I really remember? Maybe 5 to 6. Paramedic. Sometimes there are strange notable things that stick in your mind. Sometimes they don't really have to be strange at all, just make you stop and think. Like how neatly they arranged their slippers at the bottom of the ladder, and you think, why did that matter to them at that time? The stillness of hangings is a very eerie thing. Most memorable for me was a middle-aged man who died alone in his apartment, not found for days. You could see a disruption of furniture in the living room. Looks like he fell here. There's a trail of blood leaving the room to his body. He's laying there, arm outstretched. His hand is 2 feet from a side table which has the only phone in the apartment. A story becomes very clear. He had a heart attack or some other sudden medical emergency, fell and struck his head. He knew he was dying and crawled to the phone, and died a couple feet short. Would he have survived if he was able to call for an ambulance? People often have a hard time forgetting dead kids. And if you do, it usually comes rushing back when you have kids yourself. That's when the PTSD kicks in force. Also a paramedic. This is just about the best answer. You see a fair amount of death, so there usually has to be something that makes it stand out above the others, as cold and distant as that sounds. So, yes and no. All of them were memorable because I connected them to my own life somehow. 2 kids, one that looked like my son, another that looked a lot like one of my best friend's daughter. He was working that code with me. One dad around my age with a 2-year-old. When we were getting him undressed, the guy was wearing very out of character toenail polish. When his wife got to the hospital, she had their daughter with her, who was wearing the same nail polish. He had painted their nails together. One because he came in dead, edit to add, traumatic arrest, and we got him back, which almost never happens. But he not only lived, he was neurologically intact the next day. Closest I've ever seen to a TV show ending. Cheesy, but I do remember my first EMS code, combo medical arrest with some burn issues. I learned a ton that call, so I remember a lot of that one. There are a lot more patients I've worked where I remember a particular detail, a sound or smell, or some little part of them. But if you put them in a lineup, I couldn't pick one out from a row of people. Yeah, former ER registered nurse, same. Kids definitely remember them all, then the oddities. Like a father and son that didn't think to open any doors or windows when they were spray painting an interior of a house. I'll never forget walking into a patient's room, reading off my clipboard, "Okay, Mrs. So-and-so, I spoke with doctors and we're gonna take you down to radiology for dash," looks up, "Oh, you're dead." I was once called to a sudden death asterisk, my second that afternoon. When I walked in, the first thing I saw was a couple of paramedics feverishly doing CPR. I said, "I'm a bit confused, I've been called to a sudden death?" One of the paramedics looked at me, and in a deadpan voice just said, "Give it 90 seconds. Asterisco ex bobi." Ever thought how potentially triggering a question like this is? I feel terrible now. I've been in the car business my whole life and a big part of the selling cars in connecting with the customer. I've had a ton of cops/medical field customers and a question around the subject of, "Wow. You must have seen everything. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen/done, to just break the ice and get the customer talking?" Seriously, I appreciate your answer and I will remember this next time. Personally, I do understand why it can be the first thing I get asked when a person finds out my occupation, pure morbid curiosity if nothing else, but it also immediately sticks in my craw because why does someone want me to revisit horrific things for their own amusement? Doesn't compare. First thing you notice pending on how they die is the odor. Burns victims have a sweet pork smell that lingers in your nose and clothes, same way fire smoke does. Trauma and blood loss you can smell first and then you taste the iron from the air in your mouth, etc. One day whilst making tissue deliveries to a university/hospital, the main person in charge of receiving and their understudy was off work, which led to me being escorted to the wrong room by a student worker. We get into the room, she walks to the far end to find a light switch and I'm in the middle ready to head in either direction. Light goes on and we realize we're surrounded by human heads on desks covered only by little pieces of paper similar to the paper towel bibs you wear at the dentist. The girl has a panic attack saying she needs to get PPE. Before she splits, I begin nervously laughing like a maniac at the situation and coincidentally she never comes back. Eventually, while hanging outside of the room, someone actually in charge shows up and apologizes profusely. Really regret not claiming to have been traumatized there. She seemed to have been fully expecting it. I've seen one, but I don't know if you could even call it a body at this point, motorcycle accident at 200 miles per hour. I remember as a kid sitting in the back seat as my parents drove down the freeway and seeing an accident with a motorcycle and the rider had been impaled through the center divider/his stomach. I don't think he was alive. Probably my first dead body ever really saw. I remember local news from a few years ago where a motorcyclist rode way too fast and his head was severed during the accident but remained in the helmet. I think as a first responder that's something you don't easily get out of your head, if you found the helmet with the head still in there. Besides funerals, I came across quite a few when I was a kid. First one was at 8 years old. We were playing by the water at Caesars Bay, Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, was a heavy mafia neighborhood at the time, and we saw waves crashing on what looked like a sleeping drunk guy's legs. We slowly climbed over the rocks to him and started poking him. He was on his belly. My friend went around to his head and yelled pretty loudly, "He doesn't have a face." So me and my other friend had to confirm because we wanted to see for ourselves. He was indeed missing his face. We ran home to tell our parents. Cops came, interviewed us with our parents. Just like we thought, he was a mobster. If you donate your body to science, once you pass you are frequently sent all across the country, simultaneously. I dealt with full cadaver boxes occasionally, but more frequently if it wasn't heads I'd do something like this one stop that involved picking up literal barrels full of bagged, knee tissue, which I would drive across town to have incinerated. Everything was nicely bagged and tagged, so I presume when they're done everything is returned to the family as cremains. Multiple, but most are just natural deaths or accidents. But the ones I hate the most are drowning/crocodile attack victims. I have a sensitive nose and bad luck. As a teenager, I used to help with SAR and had found 3 bloated bodies in 3 different missions. It sucks. The smell will get stuck in my head for days, which means I would not have any appetite until it goes away. There's a time frame when the body would be the smelliest, and I want to say 3 days, but my memory is unreliable.